The wind howled like a wounded beast across the Wyoming plains, a bitter edge to it that sliced through the threadbare denim of the drifter's coat. It was a sound that carried both menace and sorrow, as if the land itself mourned the cruelties it had witnessed. But it wasn't the wind that halted Elias Turner's slow ride through the dusk. It was another sound, faint but sharp, cutting through the vast emptiness of the high country like a blade through hide. A desperate, human cry, fragile yet piercing, followed by the low, guttural yips of coyotes closing in from the shadowed hills. Elias reined in his mare, a sturdy roan named Juniper, and tilted his head, listening. His weathered face, etched with lines carved by 52 years of hard living, tightened as the sound came again, a stifled sob, unmistakably human. He knew these lands, knew the savagery that festered in the hearts of men who called them home. The cry wasn't from some lost calf or stranded traveler. It was something darker, something deliberate. His gut twisted, a familiar ache that told him he'd stumbled into trouble he didn't want, but couldn't ignore. He urged Juniper forward, her hooves muffled against the dry grass, following the sound toward a shallow draw just below the ridge he'd been tracking. The fading light cast long, jagged shadows across the earth, and as he crested the rise, he saw her, a young woman no older than 16, bound to a gnarled fence post in the middle of the draw. Her dress, patterned with simple calico, was torn and streaked with dust. Her dark hair hung in tangles, framing a face pale with fear yet rigid with defiance. She was Crow. He could tell from the intricate beadwork on her skirt, now frayed and filthy. The ropes bit into her wrists, and her eyes darted toward the horizon where the coyotes' calls grew louder, their shapes flickering in the twilight. This was no accident. The ranchers who roamed these parts had left her here, a cruel offering to the wild, a message scrawled in blood and terror. Elias had seen this kind of brutality before, men who saw native lives as less than livestock, who used fear as a tool to claim land that was never theirs to begin with. The girl's predicament was a grim sport, a way to assert dominance over the Crow who still dared to roam these hills. The coyotes were close now, their eyes glinting like sparks in the gathering dark. Elias sat motionless atop Juniper, his silhouette blending with the rocky outcrop behind him. Every instinct screamed at him to turn away. He was a man on the run not from the law, but from his own past, a former gunslinger turned wanderer. He'd spent years dodging the ghosts of his former life, seeking only the quiet of the open range. Getting involved meant stepping back into the light, inviting the kind of trouble that clung like damp rot. His hands, scarred from a decade of violence, tightened on the reins. He could ride on, leave her to her fate, and no one would ever know he'd been here. The West was vast, and its secrets were buried deep. But then the girl's head tilted, her shoulders sagging in a moment of quiet surrender. It wasn't a cry or a struggle that broke him, it was the silence of her despair, the way she seemed to accept the end as inevitable. Something snapped inside Elias, a fracture in the iron wall he'd built around his heart. He'd seen too much death, caused too much of it, to let this one pass. His hand moved to the Bowie knife at his belt, its worn handle familiar against his palm. The blade gleamed faintly as he drew it, a cold promise of action. This was a fool's errand, a defiance of every rule he'd lived by since he'd left his old life behind. But it was also a reckoning, a nod to some unspoken code buried deep within him, a code that demanded he act, even if it meant his own ruin. He nudged Juniper forward, not with the reckless charge of youth, but with the measured steps of a man who knew the cost of every choice. The mare moved silently, her hooves barely disturbing the earth. The girl's head jerked up as he emerged from the shadows, her dark eyes wide with a new kind of fear. To her, he was just another threat, another man with a blade in a world that had already betrayed her. She pulled against the ropes, a choked gasp escaping her lips. Elias didn't speak. Words were frail things out here, easily shattered by the wind. He dismounted with the ease of a man who'd spent half his life in the saddle, his eyes scanning the rim of the draw for the coyotes' approach. Their scent was heavy now, a sharp, musky tang that promised violence. He approached the post, raising his empty hand in a gesture of peace. The girl flinched, but held her ground, her gaze locked on his knife. He worked quickly, slipping the blade under the rawhide bindings, careful not to nick her skin. The ropes were tight, cutting deep into her wrists, and he could feel the tremor of her fear through the wood. With a final slice, the bindings fell away, coiling like snakes in the dirt. For a moment, she didn't move, as if freedom was a concept too foreign to grasp. Elias stepped back, giving her space, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. He nodded toward Juniper, an invitation rather than an order. Her eyes flicked from his weathered boots to his shadowed face, searching for intent. The coyote's howls were closer now, a tightening noose of sound. That broke her hesitation. She stumbled to her feet, her legs unsteady from hours of confinement, and moved toward the horse. Elias mounted first, then offered his hand. After a long pause, she took it, her grip cold and trembling. He pulled her up, settling her in front of him, and turned Juniper toward the darkening horizon, leaving the post and its grim purpose behind. As they rode into the night, the first coyote appeared at the edge of the draw, its lean form a flicker of gray against the starlight. They had cheated death for now, but Elias knew the West never forgot a debt. Every act of defiance came with a price, and he could feel it looming, as certain as the shadows trailing them. For 3 days, they traveled south through a landscape of endless sagebrush and eroded hills, the sun a relentless weight on their shoulders. The silence between them was as vast as the plains, born of necessity and mistrust. Elias was a stranger who'd stepped out of the dust to save her, but his quiet demeanor and the weight of his gaze suggested a man carrying his own burdens. The girl, for her part, was a coiled spring, her every movement laced with caution. She ate sparingly, drank even less, and slept in fits, her body curled tight beneath the thin blanket Elias had given her. He watched her closely, noting the way her fingers twitched in sleep, as if fighting off invisible threats. Her resilience was unmistakable, a fire banked but never extinguished. He called her girl in his mind, for she hadn't offered a name, and he hadn't asked. On the second day, he tried. "You got a name?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. She turned her dark eyes on him, their depths unreadable, and said nothing. The silence was answer enough. Elias didn't press. He was used to solitude, to the quiet that stretched between campfires and stars. But her silence was different. It was a fortress, and he found himself wondering what lay behind its walls. They made camp each night in hidden hollows or beneath rocky overhangs, places where the wind couldn't carry their scent to predators, human or otherwise. Elias took the first watch, his rifle across his lap, the firelight casting her face in sharp relief. She slept with one hand clutching the blanket, her jaw set even in dreams. He saw the weight of her losses in the lines of her face, losses he could only guess at. He'd given her his spare blanket, a faded thing patched with care, and each morning she folded it with precision, placing it beside his bedroll, a silent gesture of acknowledgement, nothing more. On the fourth day, the heat became a living thing, a malevolent force that pressed down on them like a fist. Their last canteen ran dry at dawn, and Elias's lips cracked, his throat raw with thirst. He'd been pushing them hard, aiming for a faint line of green on the horizon that he hoped signaled a stream. But he'd misjudged, pushed her too far. She slid from Juniper without a sound, collapsing into the dust like a broken doll. Elias was off the saddle in an instant, his heart pounding with a fear that caught him off guard. He knelt beside her, turning her gently. Her face was flushed, her skin hot and dry. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes closed. For the first time, he saw her not as a symbol of defiance or a burden, but as a young woman teetering on the edge of survival. He cursed himself for his carelessness. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than he meant. "Stay with me." He patted her cheek, and her eyelids fluttered, her gaze unfocused. "Water," she whispered, the word barely audible. "I know," he said. "Just a bit further." He pulled his flask from his coat, the one he kept for emergencies, and dampened his bandana with the last drops. He pressed it to her lips, watching as she sucked at the faint moisture. Her eyes cleared for a moment, meeting his, and in them he saw not fear, but a flicker of recognition. She saw the worry etched into his face, the desperation in his gray eyes. He was as bound to this unforgiving land as she was. He carried her to the shade of a lone cottonwood, her weight startlingly light in his arms. Leaving her was a risk. Coyotes and worse roamed these hills, but staying meant death for them both. "I'll be back," he said, more to himself than to her. Her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "Don't," she rasped, the word heavy with a lifetime of betrayal. He looked at her hand, small against his scarred wrist, and covered it with his own. "I will be back," he said, meeting her gaze. "I swear it." She searched his eyes, then nodded, her grip loosening. As he turned to go, she spoke again, her voice faint but clear. "Leela." He stopped, turning back. "What?" "My name," she said. "It's Leela." The giving of her name was a gift, a fragile thread spun across the chasm of their silence. It changed everything. She was no longer just the girl tied to a post. She was Leela, a name that carried weight, a responsibility that settled over Elias like a mantle. He nodded. "Elias," he said, offering his own name in return. He found water an hour later, a muddy trickle seeping from a rock crevice. He filled his hat, careful not to spill a drop, and hurried back. Leela was sitting up, propped against the cottonwood, her eyes tracking his approach. She hadn't given up. He knelt and offered the water, and as she drank, her gaze never left his. For the first time, he saw not fear or defiance, but the faint stirrings of trust. Their refuge was a crumbling homestead tucked in a narrow valley, its sagging walls a testament to dreams long abandoned. The roof had caved in years ago, leaving only a skeleton of timber and stone. A rusted plow lay half buried in the dirt, and the wind whispered through a broken window, carrying echoes of a family that had tried and failed to carve a life here. For Elias and Leela, it was a sanctuary hidden from the open plains. They built a small fire in the shadow of a stone wall, careful to keep the smoke low. The setting sun painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, and as the light faded, Elias felt the weight of his past pressing closer. A child's tin whistle lay in the dirt near the doorway, its surface pitted with rust. He nudged it with his boot, and the sight unleashed a flood of memories he'd fought to bury. A different home, a different child's toy, a woman's voice silenced too soon. His hand drifted to a faded scar on his neck, a reminder of the day his world had burned. He grew quiet, his usual reserve giving way to a haunted stillness. The firelight flickered, but his eyes saw a different flame, one that had consumed everything he'd loved. Leela watched him from across the fire, her sharp eyes reading the shift in his demeanor. She'd seen his silences before, but this was differentic with unspoken pain. In her culture, grief was a communal burden, not a solitary weight. To see him carry it alone stirred something in her, a need to ease his suffering. She noticed a cut on his hand, red and swollen from a fall during their desperate ride. Without a word, she slipped into the twilight, returning with a handful of sage and yarrow. She knelt by the fire, grinding the herbs with a smooth stone, her movements practiced and sure. The sharp, earthy scent filled the air, cutting through the smoke. Elias watched, his memories receding as curiosity took hold. She produced a thick paste, gesturing toward his hand. He hesitated. Tedker was a foreign thing, a luxury he'd denied himself for years. But her eyes held no judgment, only an offering. Slowly, he extended his hand. Her touch was gentle, cleaning the wound with a damp cloth before applying the paste. The coolness soothed the angry skin, and as she worked, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "This is yarrow," she said, nodding to the paste. "It calms the heat, and this," she pointed to a root, "keeps the wound clean. My mother taught me. She said the land holds its own healing, if you know where to look." Her words were more than instruction, they were a sharing of her heritage, a piece of her past offered in the ruins of another's failure. The irony wasn't lost on Elias. Her quiet strength, her knowledge, began to work on a deeper wound, one no blade could touch. When she finished, she wrapped his hand with a strip torn from her dress, the act intimate and profound. They sat in silence, but it was a new silence, no longer a barrier but a shared space. Elias looked from his bandaged hand to her face, illuminated by the fire's glow. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with meaning. She nodded, her eyes soft. "The land gives," she said, "but you have to be open to it." That night, as Elias took watch, the homestead's ruins seemed less a place of loss and more a space of unexpected grace. The tin whistle no longer felt like a ghost, but a reminder that even in broken places, healing could begin. As the first rays of dawn pierced the valley where Elias and Leela had found temporary refuge, in the crumbling homestead, the fragile peace they had forged began to unravel with the distant thunder of approaching hooves. Elias stirred from his watch, his senses sharpening at the unfamiliar sound echoing through the narrow canyon. The night had been one of quiet revelation, where Lila's gentle care had begun to mend not just his physical wound, but the deeper scars of his soul. Yet, the West had a way of reminding men like him that solace was fleeting, and old debts demanded payment. He rose swiftly, his bandaged hand flexing instinctively as he reached for his rifle. Leela was already awake, her eyes alert, folding the blanket with the same precise movements that had become a ritual between them. She sensed the shift in the air, the way the birds had fallen silent, as if the land itself held its breath. From a vantage point on the canyon rim, Elias scanned the horizon with his spyglass, the brass tuba relic from his days as a scout. A plume of dust rose in the north, miles away, but moving with deliberate speed. He focused the lens, his jaw tightening. 5 riders, hardened men by their posture, clad in dusters and wide-brimmed hats. They weren't lawmen, their gear spoke of ranch hands, the kind who enforced claims with lead rather than deeds. At the lead was a stocky figure, his face obscured, but his bearing arrogant, as if the plains bowed to him. Elias swept the glass lower, spotting a small herd of cattle grazing in a distant meadow. On one steer's flank, branded deep into the hide, was a twisted symbol, a coiled lasso crossed with thorns. It was the same mark he'd glimpsed on a fence post near where he'd found Leela tied as bait. These weren't random travelers. They were hunters, and their quarry was clear. Elias slid back from the edge, his movements silent and efficient. The time for healing was over. Survival demanded action. Back at the homestead, Leela had already begun packing their scant belongings, her face set in determination. She didn't need words to understand tension in Elias's stride told the story. "How many?" she asked, her voice steady, betraying no fear. "5, he replied, his tone clipped. "And they're branded with that thorn lasso, the same as the post." Her eyes hardened, the mask of a warrior slipping into place. This wasn't just a chase, it was personal. "The high ground to the west," she said, pointing toward a rugged line of bluffs. "The trails are narrow, full of loose stone. It'll slow their horses." Elias nodded, trusting her knowledge of the terrain. She'd grown up in these lands, her people navigating them long before fences and brands divided them. "We ride now." Their escape transformed from a cautious journey into a frantic evasion. The open plains that had once offered anonymity now felt like a trap, every hill a potential ambush point. They pushed Juniper and a second Horsia Bay gelding Elias had traded for in a forgotten mining town. Days prior to their limits, the thorn lasso brand became a haunting emblem, representing the greed that fenced off not just earth but lives. Viewing a crow girl as vermin to be exterminated, Elias felt a cold rage building, a fire he thought he'd extinguished years ago. This wasn't merely mercy anymore. It was rebellion against the injustice that scarred the frontier. They veered into the treacherous bluffs Leela had suggested, the ground turning jagged with shale and thorns that clawed at their mounts' legs. The air thinned as they climbed, the wind whipping colder, biting through their clothes. They were gaining time, but at a steep cost. By dusk, both horses were foaming, their steps faltering. They made a cold camp in a shallow crevice, no fire to signal their position. As they gnawed on hardtack, the silence was laden with exhaustion and resolve. Elias cleaned his revolver, the metallic clicks a soothing rhythm in the dark. "They won't stop," Leela whispered, her eyes on the stars. "The leader, Harlan, his ego is a venomous thing. He can't abide a girl he discarded walking free, or a stranger mocking his authority." Elias paused, studying her. "You know him." She nodded, her gaze distant. "He and his outfit raised my family's camp, claimed our few horses strayed onto their range. My uncle tried talking peace. They answered with fire." Her voice was emotionless, which amplified the horror. "I was out foraging, saw the flames from afar. By the time I returned, nothing but ashes. Harlan caught me days later, said I'd serve as a lesson." The revelation hit Elias like a gut punch. This wasn't a faceless pursuit. It was the architect of her tragedy on their trail. His burden grew heavier, her fate woven with his. He'd fled his own violence, seeking erasure in the wilderness. But the West dragged men back into the fray. He checked his ammunition, the motions practiced. Looking at her unyielding spirit, he made his choice. "Then we don't run forever," he said, resolute. "We find ground to fight on." 2 days later, their path led into a maze of red rock canyons, eroded by time into towers and spires that cast eerie shadows. Leela guided them to a spot she called Raven's Perch, a broad shelf midway up a cliff, reached by a single, winding trail that funneled attackers into a kill zone. A trickle of water from a spring below provided sustenance. It was defensible, a place to turn the hunt against the hunters. As evening fell, painting the rocks in fiery hues, they prepared. They watered the horses and hid them in a nearby alcove. Supplies were meager, jerky, a pouch of beans, and limited bullets. Their small fire, shielded by rocks, cast dancing lights on the walls. The gravity of their stand stripped away illusions. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but united in purpose. Leela arranged the cartridges methodically, her calm steadying Elias's frayed nerves. She wasn't a victim. She was a fighter, ready for reckoning. "They'll hit at first light," Elias said, his voice low. "Follow our tracks right to us." Leela glanced up. "You gave me your name, Elias, but not why you were there that night. No one risks everything for a stranger without cause." The question pierced his defenses. On this ledge, facing possible death, secrets felt burdensome. He drew a breath, the night air cool against his skin. "I had a life once," he began, voice strained. "A wife, Clara, and a daughter, Emma. We homesteaded in Montana, good soil, a cabin we built together." He paused, memories flooding. "Too good. A cattle baron wanted it for his spread. I refused. Thought my grit was enough." His hand traced the scar on his neck. "I was in town one day, fetching wire. Left my shotgun home. Promised Emma I'd bring candy." His voice cracked. "Came back to smoke and ruin. They didn't just take the land, they erased us." Leela touched his scar gently. "The fire," she murmured. He nodded. "Too late for them. But I tracked the Baron and his crew. Became what they made me, shadow, dealing death." His eyes met hers, raw with regret. "Been drifting since, running from that shadow. Seeing you. It was a shot at redemption, at being on time." She didn't pull away. Her empathy was a balm. "You're no shadow, Elias," she said firmly. "You're a guardian. My people say loss forges the spirit, to shield what's left." She slid bullets toward him. "I am what's left. Your chance is here." Their hands met over the cartridges, merging their paths. This fight was theirs, for survival and absolution. Elias felt his ghosts quiet, watching now instead of haunting. "I'll keep you safe, Leela," he vowed, "no matter the cost." Dawn arrived crisp, the canyon silent as a grave. From Raven's Perch, Elias spotted the riders weaving through the rocks below. 5 men, led by Harlan, a broad-shouldered brute with a scarred face. They followed the trail confidently, rifles ready. "Here they come," Elias murmured. Leela crouched behind cover, rifle in hand, shed proven adept, another layer of her resilience. "Stay put," he ordered. "Only shoot if they breach." He positioned at the trailhead, where the path narrowed. Drawing on buried skills, he became the phantom he'd once been, Silver Wraith, a name whispered in fear across territories. The first rider ascended, cocky, calling, "Show yourself, squaw." "Harlan wants words." Elias waited, letting him near. Then he stepped out, revolver barking. The man tumbled, lifeless. Chaos below, shots ricocheted as the others scattered. Elias faded back, using the train. "Just one fella," Harlan bellowed. "Fan out." But Elias was no novice. He picked off another circling the rocks, then a third breaking for horses. Leela watched, awed by his lethal precision, a dance of death born from pain. The stories of the Silver Wraith clicked, a man avenging his family, vanishing after a trail of bodies. Now to left, including Harlan. "I know you," Harlan yelled, fear creeping. "The Wraith thought you were legend or dead." Elias reloaded calmly. "That Baron burned a family, like you did hers." "She ain't Familicia's crow trash," Harlan spat. "Same difference," Elias replied, voice echoing. Harlan charged, firing wildly. Elias's shots felled him, the final echoes fading. Silence returned, gun smoke acrid. Elias turned to Leela, wondering if she'd see the monster now. She approached, touching his cheek. "It's not ended," she said. "It's starting." Her acceptance bridged his divides. They scavenged supplies, leaving the dead to the elements. Riding out, a new bond formed, quiet love blooming amid bloodshed. They headed toward a verdant valley, smoke from crow fires signaling safety. But Elias knew his past might endanger it. Their trail's end loomed, bittersweet. The valley unfolded below them like a promise kept. A lush basin cradled by rolling hills where a river wound through stands of pine and aspen. In the distance, the soft glow of campfires dotted the landscape, rising from a sizable crow villagitans and lodges clustered around communal grounds. Alive with the sounds of life resuming after hardship, Elias and Leela had ridden for days through gentler terrain, the harsh canyons giving way to meadows dotted with wildflowers. The silence between them had evolved into a comfortable companionship, punctuated by shared glances and small gestures. A flower Leela tucked into Juniper's mane, a story Elias told of clearer times. As they descended, villagers emerged, their faces lighting with recognition and joy. An elder couple, Lila's kin, rushed forward, enveloping her in embraces laced with tears. Elias remained mounted at the periphery, an interloper in this world of connection. He was a wanderer, shaped by loss and violence. This haven of family and tradition was hers alone. Leela approached him after, her eyes shining yet shadowed. "You're safe," he said, throat tight. "Thanks to you," she replied, hand on his stirrup. "Stay, Elias. Find peace here." The temptation was profound, a life with her, free from shadows. But visions of his past, of fire and pursuit, warned him. His legend could draw danger. To protect her truly, he must go. He kissed her hand. "My peace is your safety, Leela. That's enough for me." He turned, riding into the sunset, heart heavy but resolved. The West claimed him, but he'd saved a piece of his soul in leaving her. As Elias crested the hill overlooking the valley where he had left Leela and her people, the sun dipping low on the horizon like a weary traveler seeking rest, he felt the pull of the unknown road ahead. A path that promised solitude, but whispered of unresolved echoes from his past. The decision to leave had been the right one. Elias knew that deep in his bones. The Crow village below was a beacon of life, of continuity and healing. A place where Leela could rebuild amidst kin who understood her losses and celebrated her strength. But for a man like him, marked by the scars of vengeance and the legend of the Silver Wraith, staying would have been a curse disguised as kindness. His presence would draw trouble like flies to a wound bounty hunters chasing old tales, rival ranchers seeking to settle scores, or simply the restless spirits of those he'd buried in his wake. No, the West demanded he keep moving, a lone figure against the endless sky, carrying his burdens into the oblivion of the frontier. Juniper plodded steadily beneath him, her gait sure despite the long days of hard riding. Elias patted her neck, grateful for her steadfast company. She'd been with him through dust storms and river crossings, a silent witness to his transformation from a broken husband and father to a drifter haunted by ghosts. As the valley faded behind a rise of grassy knolls, his mind wandered back, unbidden, to the events that had led him here. The rescue of Leela had been a spark, igniting something he thought long extinguished, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. But now, alone again, the flames flickered low, threatened by the winds of memory. He rode through the night, the stars a vast canopy overhead, indifferent to the struggles of men below. The air grew cooler as he ascended into higher country, pine trees replacing the open grasslands, their scent sharp and cleansing. Elias made camp in a small clearing, building a modest fire to ward off the chill. As the flames crackled, he unwrapped his bandaged hand, the one Leela had tended with her herbal paste. The wound had healed remarkably, the redness faded to a faint scar, a testament to her knowledge and care. Touching it, he felt a pang, not of pain, but of loss. Her touch had been more than healing. It had been a bridge to humanity, a reminder that even in desolation, connection was possible. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of fire and gunfire. He saw Clara's face, smiling in the sunlight of their Montana homestead, Emma's laughter echoing as she chased butterflies in the meadow. Then the flames, consuming everything, the Baron's men riding away with smirks of satisfaction. Elias woke before dawn, sweat-soaked despite the cold, his hand instinctively reaching for his revolver. The past was a relentless pursuer, faster than any posse, and tonight it had caught up. Breaking camp, he continued west, toward the rugged peaks of the Rockies that loomed like sentinels on the horizon. The trail narrowed, winding through forests thick with underbrush. The sounds of wildlife a constant companion, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of deer in the ferns. Elias's thoughts turned to Leela, wondering if she had shared their story with her aunt and uncle, if the village elders had welcomed her back with rituals of purification and renewal. He pictured her among her people, her dark eyes alight with the fire of survival, perhaps even finding joy in the simple rhythms of camp life. The image brought a rare smile to his lips, cracked though they were from the dry mountain air. Days blurred into one another as he climbed higher, the air thinning, his breaths coming shorter. Juniper struggled on the steep inclines, but Elias dismounted often, leading her to ease the burden. He foraged for berries and roots, recalling Lila's lessons on the land's provisions, and hunted small game with his rifle, the shots echoing through the canyons like distant thunder. One afternoon, as he rested by a crystal-clear stream, he spotted movement on the opposite bank, a grizzly bear, massive and unhurried, fishing for salmon with powerful swipes. Elias froze, hand on his gun, but the bear paid him no mind, focused on its meal. In that moment, he envied the creature's singular existence, free from the complexities of human grudge and regret. The encounter stirred deeper reflections. Elias had always seen himself as a predator, shaped by loss into a force of retribution. But saving Leela had shown him another city, a protector, capable of mercy amid the violence. Was that enough to redeem a life stained by blood? He pondered this as he rode on, the mountains closing in, their snow-capped summits a stark reminder of nature's unforgiving beauty. The West was a land of extremes, where men were forged or broken, and Elias wondered if he could ever truly escape the forge's heat. On the 5th day since leaving the valley, he crested a pass and descended into a hidden basin, a verdant oasis ringed by cliffs. A small cabin stood at its center, smoke curling from the chimney, the scent of baking bread wafting on the breeze. Curiosity drew him closer, though caution kept his hand near his holster. As he approached, an old man emerged, white-haired and bent with age, a shotgun cradled in his arms, but not raised. "Stranger," the man called, his voice gravelly but not hostile. "What brings you to my corner of the world?" Elias reined in Juniper, raising a hand in peace. "Just passing through, seeking no trouble." "Name's Elias." The old man eyed him shrewdly, then lowered the shotgun. "Name's Harlanwaite." "No, that's a name with bad echoes." "Call me Jed. Been here 30 years, mining a bit, trapping mostly." "Come, share a meal. Looks like you could use one." Wary but intrigued, Elias dismounted and followed Jed inside. The cabin was cozy, walls lined with pelts and shelves of books, faded tomes on philosophy and history. Unexpected in such isolation. Over stew and fresh biscuits, Jed shared his story, a former soldier from the Civil War, disillusioned by the carnage, who'd sought solitude to escape the ghosts of battle. "Violence begets violence," Jed said, stirring his coffee. "I saw brothers kill brothers, all for ideals that turned to dust. Left it all behind, but the memories, they linger." Elias nodded, the words resonating. He found himself opening up, recounting his own talent at the full legend of the Silver Wraith. But the core, the loss of his family, the path of vengeance, the recent act of saving Leela. Jed listened without judgment, his eyes wise with shared pain. "Sounds like you've paid your debt, son," he said finally. "But redemption ain't a destination, it's a journey. You can't outrun yourself forever." Their conversation stretched into the night, Jed sharing wisdom gleaned from years alone. He spoke of injustice in the West, land grabs that displaced natives like Lila's people, the greed that fueled range wars, the cycle of violence that claimed innocence. Men like that Baron, or the rancher who hunted your girl, they're symptoms of a sick society. Jed mused, "But folks like you, who choose mercy, that's the cure, even if it costs." Elias slept soundly that night in the cabin's loft, the first true rest in weeks. In the morning, Jed offered supplied meat, ammunition, a map to safer trails. If you're seeking peace, head north to the Yellowstone, he advised. Wild country, but honest. No room for old grudges there. Parting with a firm handshake, Elias rode on, Jed's words echoing in his mind. The encounter had been a turning point, a mirror reflecting his growth. No longer just fleeing. He was moving toward something, a life where his skills protected rather than destroyed. Weeks turned 2 months as Elias traversed the Rockies, the seasons shifting from summer's warmth to autumn's golden hues. He encountered travelers along the way, a family of settlers bound for Oregon, sharing tales of hope, a trapper who warned of harsh winters ahead, even a wandering preacher who spoke of forgiveness as a divine gift. Each interaction chipped away at his isolation, reminding him that the West, for all its brutality, held pockets of kindness. One crisp fall day, as leaves swirled in the wind, Elias reached the banks of the Yellowstone River, its waters rushing with untamed energy. He built a small cabin of his own, using skills honed from his homestead days, felling logs and chinking walls against the cold. It was simple, but sturdy, a place to winter, perhaps longer. He hunted and fished, the rhythm soothing, his thoughts often drifting to Leela. He wondered if she thought of him, if her life had blossomed in the valley. As snow blanketed the land, Elias found peace in the solitude, reading books traded from passersby, reflecting on his journey. The ghosts of Clara and Emma visited in dreams, not as accusations, but as gentle reminders of love lost and lessons learned. The silver wraith faded, replaced by Elias Turner, a man who had chosen light over shadow. Spring brought thaw and renewal. One day, a rider approached his cabina, young crow man, bearing a message bundled in beaded leather. Heart-pounding, Elias unfolded it, a drawing of a flower symbolizing hope, and words in careful script, "The land heals, as do we. Your peace is mine. Leela." Tears stung his eyes, the first in years. He wasn't alone, their bond endured across the miles. Elias stayed by the Yellowstone, becoming a quiet guardian of the wilds, aiding travelers and respecting the land. In time, stories spread not of a vengeful wraith, but of a wise hermit who embodied justice without violence. The West had claimed many, but Elias had claimed his redemption, a life forged in fire, tempered by mercy, ending not in solitude, but in quiet fulfillment. And so, the outcast found his way home. What do you think, dear readers? Share your thoughts in the comments below, especially on the themes of violence and injustice in our lives. Do you believe redemption is possible after a life of hardship? Take a stand and express your views. We'd love to hear from you.